Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy your viewing.
Trust had always been the cornerstone of my life, a belief that love and loyalty were inseparable. My name is Michael, and for nearly 10 years I lived with my wife, Laura, cherishing a world of shared dreams and quiet joys. Every morning, her warm smile and gentle voice promised a day filled with hope, a promise that I held dear. Yet beneath the surface of our peaceful existence, small hints of discontent had begun to stir, unnoticed until fate intervened. One ordinary morning, as soft light filtered through our kitchen window, I discovered a series of messages on her phone that would unravel everything I thought I knew. The words, filled with tenderness and secrecy, were not meant for me but for someone else. In that moment, the foundation of our love trembled, and my heart was pierced by an unimaginable betrayal. I felt a wave of confusion and despair crashing over me, as each message revealed a secret that shattered the trust one had built over years. The familiar warmth of our home turned cold, and every comforting detail became a painful reminder of the deception that lurked in our midst. I realized then that the life I had known was merely an illusion, and the journey ahead would be filled with heartache and introspection, forcing me to confront a truth I never wished to face. I sat there, trembling, as reality sank in, my mind raced with memories, regrets, and the painful echoes of lost trust indeed. After that devastating morning, I wandered through the day in a daze, unable to shake the dark thoughts that clung to me. Every moment felt heavy, as though time itself was mourning the loss of innocence. I attempted to maintain my routine, yet every interaction and every familiar sight reminded me of the betrayal hidden behind Laura's gentle smile. In a desperate search for clarity, I meticulously examined her phone, each message a piercing reminder of secrets kept in the shadows. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and sorrow as I pieced together the evidence of her infidelity. I recalled moments when her eyes would betray fleeting glances of guilt, when her laughter seemed forced during our conversations. The more I uncovered, the deeper the chasm between us became. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, I confronted the reality that the love we once shared was irrevocably tainted. My mind wrestled with disbelief and anguish, while a cold resolve began to form in the recesses of my heart. I knew I had to face Laura, to demand an explanation for the lies that had eroded the foundation of our marriage. In that solitary darkness, the weight of truth bore down upon me, transforming every cherished memory into a painful reminder of betrayal and loss. Tears streamed silently as I braced myself for the confrontation, knowing that nothing would ever restore the innocence we once enjoyed. My soul trembled with despair. Days turned into restless nights as I grappled with the painful revelations. I found myself questioning not only Laura's actions but also the parts of me that had allowed our connection to weaken over time. In solitude, I revisited memories of our early days together, recalling laughter, shared dreams, and the unspoken promises of forever. Now, every recollection was tinted with sorrow and regret, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I struggled to understand how someone I loved so deeply could harbor such hidden desires. The betrayal gnawed at my core, leaving me to confront painful truths about my own vulnerabilities and shortcomings. Each day, as I walked the empty streets of our neighborhood, the echoes of our past resonated in the silence, urging me to seek answers. I began to write in a journal, pouring out emotions that ranged from anger to despair, trying to capture the myriad of feelings that swirled within me. The process was both cathartic and excruciating, as I relived moments of joy now tainted by deception. I questioned every gesture, every kind word, wondering if I had been blinded by love. With each written word, I slowly began to reclaim pieces of my identity, even as the shadow of betrayal loomed large, threatening to engulf all that I once held dear. In that fragile space between despair and hope, I resolved to rise above the pain, determined to rebuild my life from the ruins of shattered trust. I embraced a new beginning. At last, the confrontation arrived. I found Laura in our bedroom, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance. As I laid out the evidence before her, the silence was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of our heavy breathing. she confessed, her voice trembling as she recounted moments of weakness and longing for something I could no longer provide. Our conversation was a clash of shattered dreams and raw emotions, each word steeped in regret and anger. In that fraught moment, I realized that the love we once shared had dissolved into bitterness, leaving only the remnants of trust and the pain of betrayal. The room, once a sanctuary of our affection, now felt like a battleground where every word was a weapon and every glance a spark for further conflict. I stood there, torn between the memories of our past and the stark reality of our present. With a heavy heart, I acknowledged that the bond we had so cherished was irreparably broken. The confrontation ended with a promise from both of us that nothing could ever restore what was lost. As I walked away from that room, I carried with me the knowledge that the path ahead would be one of solitude and self-discovery, for the love we had was now nothing more than a bitter relic of a time long gone. In that final, heavy moment, I accepted the truth: our lives were destined to part in irreconcilable hostility. I stepped away with resolve. The days following that painful confrontation blurred together as if I were living in a dream. In the wake of that fateful night, when every cherished memory seemed to crumble beneath the weight of betrayal, I found myself trapped in a cycle of relentless introspection and raw emotion. My heart, once buoyed by hope, now beat with a heavy, relentless rhythm of sorrow and anger. It was as if every second was a reminder of the love that had been so brutally dismantled. The initial shock had given way to a grim routine, waking up in a silent house that echoed with memories of happier times, a quiet stillness that was almost deafening in its absence of warmth. I spent long hours pacing the floor, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of passing cars serving as the only companions in my solitude. I struggled to reconcile the man I believed I was with the reality of a shattered existence. The betrayal was not only a blow to my trust in Laura but also a mirror reflecting my own vulnerabilities, my own failings, even if I could never fully understand how it had all come to pass. Every day, I attempted to engage in activities that once brought me solace: reading, writing in my journal, even taking solitary walks through our neighborhood, but each action was tainted by a bitter reminder of what had been lost. The world outside, once vibrant and full of possibility, now appeared indifferent to my suffering. I longed for answers that might help me comprehend the unfathomable, yet every search for clarity only deepened the void within. One evening, driven by an urge to escape the oppressive atmosphere of our empty home, I ventured out to a small, familiar cafe where I had often found respite. The low murmur of conversations and the soft clinking of cups provided a temporary distraction. Seated in a corner, I sipped lukewarm coffee and attempted to lose myself in a book, but my mind kept wandering back to the haunting truth that had upended my life. It was there, in that modest haven, that I encountered Richard, a longtime friend who, despite his own busy life, had always been a reliable pillar of support. His concerned eyes met mine as he approached, and without a word, he pulled out a chair, silently offering companionship. Richard's presence was a lifeline amid the storm of my emotions. Over the next few hours, as the sky darkened outside and the cafe's lights grew dimmer, we talked about everything and nothing. He listened attentively as I recounted the painful details of my discovery, the long hours spent piecing together fragments of a broken trust. I watched as his face shifted from shock to sorrow, and eventually to a resolute determination to help me heal. Richard's steady voice reminded me that while the pain was raw and all-consuming, I was not alone in this struggle. His unwavering empathy offered a glimmer of hope, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, I could eventually learn to live with this loss. Yet even as I tried to lean on Richard's friendship, the memory of Laura's betrayal continued to haunt me. I recalled the countless moments when her eyes had flickered with hidden secrets, the laughter that now seemed so insincere. In the quiet hours of the night, the house that we had once built together now felt like a mausoleum for our dreams. I started to question every interaction, every shared glance, wondering if I had been naive or if I had simply failed to see the signs that were there all along. Haunted by these thoughts, I began a painful journey of self-examination. I revisited our early days, the stolen glances, the whispered promises, the plans for a future that now lay in ruins. In those memories, I sought solace and answers, searching for clues that might explain how love could mutate into something so destructive. The more I delved into my own past, the more I recognized that perhaps the seeds of betrayal had been sown long before I discovered the messages on her phone. I started to understand that both of us had been flawed, caught in a web of unmet needs and unspoken resentments. In an effort to find a semblance of closure, I turned to writing. My journal, once filled with trivial daily musings, became the repository for my deepest regrets, my unvoiced questions, and my raw, unfiltered pain. Every night, I poured my heart onto those pages, a cathartic exercise that allowed me to articulate the chaos inside me. I wrote about the moments of tenderness that now felt like cruel illusions, about the small gestures that I had taken for granted. With each word, I hoped to reclaim some control over the narrative of my life, to transform the chaos of betrayal into a story of survival. The process was excruciating. Some nights, as I reread my scribbled confessions, the anguish would resurface with an intensity that left me breathless. Yet, in the midst of that suffering, there was also a spark of defiance, a determination to not let this betrayal define the rest of my life. I began to envision a future where I could rise from the ruins, where the pain of today would eventually give way to the strength of tomorrow. This vision was fragile, flickering like a candle in the wind, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. As days turned into weeks, I started to carve out moments of solitude for reflection. I took long walks under starlit skies, the cool night air a silent witness to my inner turmoil. With each step, I felt both the burden of the past and the faint stirrings of a new beginning. The city, with all its indifferent hustle, continued its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the quiet battles waged in the hearts of its inhabitants. And somewhere in that vast urban landscape, I began to understand that pain was as much a part of life as love. My thoughts often drifted back to Laura, once the center of my universe, now a ghost that haunted every corner of my memory. I recalled the subtle signs of her discontent, the whispered conversations that had grown louder with time. In these recollections, there was an undeniable mix of anger and sorrow. The love we had shared was a tapestry woven with threads of passion and betrayal, and now it seemed that those threads had unraveled beyond repair. I was left with only fragments of a once beautiful story, and the bitter truth that the person I thought I knew was irreversibly changed. One rainy afternoon, while sitting in the park under a sodden canopy, I encountered another familiar face, Samantha, a mutual acquaintance who had always been privy to the nuances of our relationship. With a gentle expression of empathy, she asked me how I was holding up. Our conversation was tender and tentative, filled with cautious words that aimed to mend the unspoken wounds. Samantha reminded me that healing was a slow, often painful process, but also one that was inevitable if I allowed myself to grow beyond the confines of betrayal. Her words, soft yet resolute, resonated with the quiet determination that was beginning to take root within me. Yet even in these moments of connection, the specter of betrayal loomed large. I knew that the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The love that had once been a beacon of hope now lay in ruins, a shattered mirror reflecting the harsh truths of human frailty. As the days passed, it became clear that Laura and I were moving in opposite directions, her own journey marked by indifference and perhaps a newfound liberation, and mine one of pain and reluctant self-discovery. In the solitude of my struggle, I gradually accepted that our marriage had reached a crossroads. There was no clear path to reconciliation, no way to rebuild what had been so callously broken. The realization was both liberating and devastating, a final acknowledgement that sometimes, love could not mend itself after the deepest of wounds. I felt the first true stirrings of a resolve to reclaim my life, even as the scars of betrayal promised to linger as painful reminders of what had been lost. As I returned home that evening, the sky darkened with the promise of rain, and the familiar surroundings of our house took on a ghostly hue. Every creak of the floorboards and every whisper of the wind seemed to echo the silent breakdown of a relationship once thought unbreakable. I knew that the painful journey of self-discovery had only just begun. The road ahead was uncertain, marked by the jagged edges of loss and the fragile hope of renewal. And yet, even in the midst of this turbulent storm, I clung to the belief that from the ashes of betrayal, a new, stronger self might emerge. That night, lying in the darkness of what had once been our shared bed, I felt an overwhelming mix of grief and resolve. I had embarked on a journey that would redefine every facet of my being, a journey not just away from the love that had betrayed me, but toward a future where I would learn to live with the scars and, ultimately, to heal. It was a path that promised solitude and hard truths, but also the possibility of a rebirth, a chance to understand that sometimes, the end of one chapter was merely the beginning of another. In that lingering silence, as I stared into the darkness, I vowed to confront each new day with a strength born of hardship, and to face the world with the resolve to reclaim my identity, even if it meant accepting that the love I had known was forever lost to the depths of betrayal. In the weeks that followed the painful confrontation, a tense calm descended upon our once shared home. The silence was heavy, each day marked by the unspoken words that floated between Laura and me like dust motes in a beam of weak sunlight. I found myself caught in a limbo where memories of our past intermingled with the ever-present sting of betrayal. I was no longer sure if I was mourning the loss of our love or mourning the loss of the future I had envisioned with her. The house, which had once been filled with laughter and vibrant energy, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy I could neither escape nor rewrite. Mornings began with the dull thud of routine, coffee brewed without taste, newspapers read without interest. Every room echoed with what we once were, yet the air was laden with a palpable tension that underscored every step I took. I would glance at photographs of happier times, smiling faces and sunlit days that now seemed like relics of a dream that had long since faded. One particular evening, as the rain battered the windows and blurred the view of the dimly lit street outside, Laura and I found ourselves in the living room, each occupying opposite ends of the space. The silence was so dense it felt as though we were encased in separate bubbles of isolation. I could sense her presence even when she didn't speak, a constant reminder of what we had lost. That night, unable to bear the stifling quiet any longer, I decided to break the silence. "Laura," I said softly, yet with an edge of bitterness, "we need to talk about what this means for us. I can't keep living in this suspended state where nothing is resolved." Her eyes met mine, guarded and distant, and for a moment, I wondered if she, too, was seeking answers. But the unspoken tension that had grown between us was far too vast to bridge with mere words. She hesitated before replying, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "Michael, I'm not sure if there's anything left to salvage." Her admission hit me like a blow, and in that charged moment, I felt both an overwhelming surge of anger and a profound sorrow. The weight of her words underscored a truth I had been trying to avoid: our relationship was unraveling before our eyes, thread by delicate thread. In the days that followed, attempts at reconciliation were met with an icy resistance. We began to argue over the smallest of matters, a misplaced cup, the temperature of the water, a comment that struck an unintended nerve. Each disagreement, however trivial it seemed, was amplified by the deep wounds that had yet to heal. The tension escalated, and with every heated exchange, the gulf between us widened, transforming our home into a battlefield of resentments. I began to notice changes in Laura. The woman who had once been the embodiment of compassion and warmth now carried herself with a guarded aloofness, her smiles forced and eyes perpetually distant. It was as if she had built a fortress around herself, shutting me out as a means of protecting whatever remained of her heart. I, too, had started to withdraw, retreating into the safety of solitude and the only comfort I had left, my journal. I spent long hours writing, trying to untangle the conflicting emotions that churned within me, and in those pages, I confronted the painful duality of love and betrayal. One late afternoon, when the sky was painted with the subdued hues of twilight, I returned home early from a solitary walk. The sound of hushed conversation drew me to the living room, where I overheard Laura speaking softly on the phone. Her words, laced with an intimacy that was now foreign to me, confirmed the worst fears I had tried so hard to suppress. The voice on the other end was gentle, reassuring, a voice that carried the promise of a new beginning that did not include me. The revelation stung deeply, rekindling the pain of betrayal and igniting a fire of indignation within me. In that moment, everything came crashing down. The past few weeks, the countless arguments, and the silence that had filled our home, all of it converged into a single, searing point of realization: our marriage was irreparably fractured. I confronted her that very night, unable to contain the torrent of emotions any longer. The confrontation was fierce, our voices raised in a discordant symphony of hurt and anger. I demanded to know why she continued to nurture this new connection when our bond was already broken. Her response was a mix of defiance and resignation, a declaration that the spark of our love had long been extinguished and that she was embracing a future without me. The intensity of that confrontation left me numb. I retreated to the solitude of my study, where I found solace in the quiet of my thoughts. I realized that despite my desperate desire to reclaim the past, the truth was undeniable: our love had deteriorated into something unrecognizable. The memories of happier times were now tainted with the bitterness of deceit, and the pain of her betrayal was an ever-present wound that refused to heal. As I lay awake in the dark of the night, the silence of our home echoed with the ghosts of our shared history. I wrestled with the conflicting desires to cling to the remnants of our past and to sever the ties that continued to chain me to a relationship built on broken promises. I questioned if the love I had once known could ever be resurrected from the ashes of betrayal, or if it was destined to remain a painful relic of a time when trust was unblemished. In the midst of my turmoil, I began to sense a shift within myself, a growing acceptance that some wounds were too deep to mend, that certain betrayals cut too deeply for forgiveness. I resolved to stop fighting a battle that was already lost, to allow the inevitable separation to unfold with the dignity that both of us deserved, however painful it might be. I recognized that our journey together had reached a dead end, and the only way forward was to embrace the finality of our disintegration. Yet, even as this acceptance took root, the idea of separation was accompanied by an overwhelming sense of loss. The home we had built, the shared dreams, and the promises of forever were all dissolving into memories that I wasn't sure I was ready to relinquish. The thought of parting ways felt like abandoning a part of myself, a part that had believed in the sanctity of love and the power of togetherness. But I knew deep down that the facade of our union had crumbled beyond repair, and that the path to healing lay in accepting the bitter truth. In the days that followed our latest confrontation, a sense of inevitability began to settle over me. The walls we had constructed, both physical and emotional, became symbols of the distance between us, a distance that grew wider with every passing moment. Our interactions were now marked by a terse formality, each conversation a reminder of the intimacy that had been eroded by betrayal. The moments of silence that once held the promise of reconciliation were now void, echoing with the finality of our disconnection. One crisp autumn morning, as the first chill of winter crept into the air, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the half-empty mug of coffee. The room was bathed in the soft light of dawn, but even that warmth could not dispel the cold reality that had taken residence in our lives. In that quiet moment, I resolved that the time had come to confront the inevitable. The love we had once shared, once full of promise and dreams, was now nothing more than a series of painful memories and shattered illusions. I knew that the final step in our journey would be as difficult as it was necessary, a formal and hostile separation that would mark the end of our marriage. There was no room left for compromise, no space for the lingering hope that things might change. The path ahead was clear, a separation that would sever the ties that bound us, a bitter farewell to a union that had long lost its meaning. As I sat there in the quiet of that early morning, the decision crystallized in my mind with stark clarity. I would no longer allow the remnants of our broken love to hold me back. Instead, I would face the future head-on, embracing the pain as a necessary prelude to a new beginning, one where I could rediscover who I was, unburdened by the shadows of betrayal. In that resolve lay both sorrow and a strange form of liberation. I understood that the end of our marriage was not just the collapse of a relationship, but the opening of a new chapter in my life, one defined by the hard lessons of loss and the promise of self-discovery. And so, as the autumn leaves rustled outside and the chill of winter hinted at the coming change, I braced myself for the final act of our tragic saga, a final, irrevocable step toward a hostile separation that would leave both our hearts scarred, yet ultimately free. The final days of our shared life arrived with the relentless force of an inevitable storm. Every moment was saturated with tension and the weight of accumulated grief, a gravity that pressed down upon me, urging a conclusion I had long dreaded but now had to face. The air in our home, once filled with the promise of a future together, now reeked of finality, as if every room had been cleansed by the bitter winds of betrayal. I had spent weeks preparing myself for this inevitable reckoning, each day chipping away at the remnants of the past until nothing remained but the raw, exposed truth of our irreparable damage. On a cold, gray morning that mirrored the desolation within, I woke with a sense of grim determination. Today was the day when the final ties would be severed, and I would no longer be tethered to the memories of a love that had turned sour. I moved through the quiet halls of our home like a ghost, every step echoing the final farewell I was about to deliver. The house, which once pulsed with our shared laughter and whispered secrets, now stood as a silent witness to our disintegration, a mausoleum of forgotten dreams and shattered promises. I found Laura in the kitchen, her back turned as she methodically packed a few belongings into a worn-out suitcase. The sound of her movements was deliberate, mechanical almost, as if she too had resigned herself to the fact that this was the end. The sight sent a jolt through me, a final confirmation that our journey had reached its destination. I paused at the doorway, trying to summon the courage to break the silence that had, for too long, muted our true emotions. "Laura," I said, my voice wavering between bitterness and sorrow, "we need to talk, this is it, isn't it? Today we sever everything." She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of regret and defiance. In that fleeting moment, I saw the woman I once loved, but that image was overlaid with the scars of betrayal, and it was impossible to separate the two. "You're right, Michael," she replied, her tone flat and devoid of the warmth it once carried. "There's nothing left to salvage, nothing worth fighting for." Her words, like cold daggers, pierced the remaining remnants of any lingering hope I might have held. The conversation that unfolded was not a gentle exchange of mutual understanding but a fierce battle of accusations and defensiveness. Words, once tender and full of promise, were now weapons aimed to wound and to validate the deep-seated pain between us. I recounted, with a voice laden with raw emotion, every betrayal, every secret glance, every lie that had cumulatively eroded the foundation of our relationship. I spoke of nights spent in restless torment and days that blurred into a haze of disillusionment, of a love that had been reduced to ashes by the flames of deceit. Laura's responses were equally charged, bitter justifications and half-hearted regrets that did little to soothe the agony of our parting. She claimed that her actions were the result of unmet needs and an insatiable longing for freedom, a freedom that our constricting routine had denied her. Each sentence she uttered felt like a betrayal all over again, reinforcing the truth that our paths had irrevocably diverged. As the argument escalated, voices raised and accusations hurled like shattered glass, the atmosphere became increasingly hostile. The living room, once our sanctuary, transformed into a war zone where every piece of furniture and every corner bore witness to our despair. In the midst of our verbal onslaught, I realized that our separation was not a gentle parting of ways but a tumultuous severance, a final act of hostility born from the deep wounds we had inflicted upon one another. The crescendo of our confrontation came when I slammed a closed box onto the table, a box containing mementos of our happier times, now just painful reminders of what had been lost. The sound reverberated through the room, a final punctuation mark to our decaying union. Laura's eyes flashed with anger and sorrow as she stared at the scattered fragments of our past, and for a brief moment, it felt as though time had frozen to immortalize our mutual devastation. "I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. I refuse to live in the shadow of your betrayals, to be haunted by memories of a love that has died a slow, painful death. Her response was a cold, measured silence that only deepened the chasm between us. The air was thick with unspoken words, the heavy silence a testament to the end of our shared narrative. In that silence, I sensed that even if words could mend broken hearts, ours had shattered beyond repair. The finality was palpable, a truth we both understood yet struggled to accept. The decision to separate was not a spontaneous one, it had been forged over countless sleepless nights and bitter reflections. Now, as we stood at the crossroads of our lives, it was time to walk our separate paths. I methodically began gathering the few personal items that remained by my side, a collection of photographs, letters, and the vestiges of a life once filled with promise. With each item I packed, I felt an acute mixture of loss and liberation, as if I were discarding not just physical belongings but the very essence of a painful chapter in my life. Outside, the weather was as bleak as the emotions within. Rain began to fall in a steady, mournful cadence, each drop echoing the cadence of our parting words. It was as though nature itself mourned the demise of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. I looked out the window one last time, watching as the droplets blurred the horizon, a metaphor for the fading future we once envisioned together. With our belongings divided and the final acts of separation executed, Laura and I shared one last, agonizing glance. In that brief, charged moment, neither of us uttered a word. The silence between us was loaded with the weight of all that had transpired, betrayals, shattered dreams, and the undeniable truth that our hearts could no longer beat as one. Finally, the time came to leave. I stepped out of the front door, the chill of the rain matching the numbness that had settled over me. Each step away from our home was a step into a future that was unknown and uncharted, a future that promised solitude, introspection, and the arduous task of rebuilding a life from the ruins of what once was. Behind me, I heard the soft, final click of the door closing, a sound that resonated like a death knell to the relationship that had defined so much of my past. As I walked away, my thoughts swirled in a chaotic blend of regret, relief, and an aching longing for a love that could never be reclaimed. I knew that the scars of this separation would not fade quickly, if ever, but deep down, I also understood that some wounds, no matter how grievous, pave the way for a rebirth of self. The journey ahead would be lonely and fraught with memories, yet it was also a journey toward rediscovery, an opportunity to redefine who I was outside the confines of a failed marriage. The finality of our parting was undeniable. Laura and I had reached the end of our intertwined paths, forced to confront the reality that sometimes love, when marred by betrayal and lost trust, cannot be mended. Our separation was not a gentle goodbye or a mutual understanding, it was a hostile cleaving of two lives once bound together by dreams that had now turned to dust. In the aftermath, as I ventured into the cold, indifferent world outside, I carried with me both the pain of our dissolution and a fragile hope that in the wake of such devastation, I might eventually find the strength to heal and to embrace a new beginning. The rain continued to fall, each drop a silent witness to the end of a chapter, a final punctuation in the tragic story of our love, now forever confined to the past, and a hostile separation that, for better or worse, marked the conclusion of our shared existence.